All right, Red Hawk fans, the season is quickly approaching. We're going across the sideline for the first time this season. Got Wisconsin's own Trey Keenis with us. Trey, thank you so much for joining. Take a chance to introduce yourself and what you do at UW.
I appreciate you having me along, Brian. Trey Keenis from University of Wisconsin-Madison. We on the call for Thursday's game between the RedHawks and the Badgers. Excited to be a part of that, and we'll be doing color commentary on behalf of the Wisconsin Student Radio as we broadcast majority of Wisconsin football games, this being one of them. And so fortunate to be along the call for that one. It should be a good one. Get a little action in Big Ten on a Thursday night. So excited for that one. And, football being back all together, just a great time to be alive and ready to go for all the action.
And the weather feels that way too. It's been so cool out lately. It's really like perfect football weather in August. Really can't complain about that at all.
Yeah, we got ourselves a little early fall here, but knowing the Midwest, I feel like you kind of get a little, flirty with that, and we'll get maybe an 80-degree week in the week following. So you never know with being, having spent the summer, as you know, in the South, it's hotter than heck down there. You get back to the Midwest, it just kind of depends on the week.
Yeah, you certainly do not know what to expect. All right, Trey, so I'll go right in. Obviously, season 3 of the Luke Fickell era. Last year, I guess you can say a little underwhelming for you guys, a 5-7 year. Going into the 2025 season, what's the general vibe on campus right now and in the fan base?
I think the issue that we've had, even going back to that last year before Fickell was even getting hired, was just the pulse of what the identity of Wisconsin football is going to be, right? Because you had this offseason with this group where you went out and you got this offensive coordinator in Jeff Grimes from Kansas that had really this powerhouse running game. I believe they ran for over 200 yards a game with the Jayhawks, a top 15 rushing team in the country. So Fickell goes out and gets this OC now with this hope to bring back Wisconsin in this traditional way, right? You saw Phil Longo, who got let go this past fall, that was with this group. So for Wisconsin, I think it really is just, having been a fan of the Badgers before I even arrived on campus growing up just down the road from Madison, you always had this identity of what Wisconsin football was. This is a power team. They're going to run the ball. They're going to have a great defense. They're not going to be really flashy. So you bring in this coach in Luke Fickell and you try and change that entire culture. Well, it hasn't exactly worked out the first 2 years. So now you're trying to backpedal a little bit. So I'm curious to see really if this group and effort to backpedal is able to kind of find their footing in year 3, because you mentioned playing a team like Miami, Ohio, and you kind of go over the course of this entire season. You got the toughest schedule in the country. So there really is no off weeks, and you got to be able to stack your wins when you can. So you come out and you play a tough MAC opponent in week 1. So I think for Wisconsin, it's really just about finding that identity. And what is that identity, right? You go and you get a quarterback in Billy Edwards, who was one of the top 5 passers in the Big Ten last year too. So you're a team that goes out and gets an OC that really wants to run the ball. But you go out and you get a quarterback that likes to throw the ball. And on top of that, where's your defense stand and all that? This was a really tough front 7 last year that ranked really towards the bottom of the Big Ten in rushing defense, on top of, just really getting the quarterback as well, just 17 sacks as a unit. So I know I'm kind of rambling here, but for me, it's just, what is this group's identity? I think, and we're excited to see where that is this year, and hopefully they're able to find one, and it's not just being mediocre in every position.
Yeah, I think from an outside perspective, that was one of the biggest things I noticed about Wisconsin the past couple of seasons. I, along as much of the country, thought the Fickell hire was outstanding. It was just going to be continuing power football that Wisconsin is so well known for. And you mentioned bringing in Jeff Grimes from Kansas last year. Very good rushing offense for the Jayhawks. Do you think that's going to be a return back to, QB under center traditional power football, or do you think it's going to be something a little more dynamic but still a good rushing attack?
I think you hope that there's a sense of going back to the running game at least a little bit. Like I said earlier, you go out and you get a guy, Billy Edwards Jr. from University of Maryland, who threw for close to 3,000 yards last year, and I would imagine that you bring him to Madison to do relatively the same thing. But I think, you talk about Grimes being the OC there now. I think there's definitely going to be more of an emphasis on running the football. And I think for Wisconsin, it's not that you have to go back to being this, we're going to run the ball 45 times a game and, whatever. It's got to be, we have a respected running game. We have a guy that we can put back there that can get, 4 or 5 yards if we need it. He can break out for a couple runs a game. That's great, right? We're not expecting Jonathan Taylor, but we're expecting consistency. And so I think for Wisconsin, it's just, you listen to, Fickle talked a lot about it this offseason, just getting back to complementary football. So it's not necessarily, you know, running game all the time or passing game all the time, but it's these groups that can kind of come together and feed off of each other. So I would imagine that we would see more of a consistency in the running game, but I would think at the same time, you bring in a guy like Billy Edwards, you're not going to be conservative and just run the ball. So I would imagine an emphasis more on the running game, but two, you give yourself a chance with the quarterback who's taking snaps under center.
Yeah, you mentioned the new quarterback, Billy Edwards, coming from Maryland. How well do you think he's going to fit into the new offense?
I think that's $1 million question, isn't it? You go back to these 2 years and you've had injuries with your starting quarterback for Wisconsin. Fickle's first year, Tanner Mordecai, I believe, missed about 4 games. And then the following year, it was Tyler Van Dyke, who just made it through that barely first quarter against Alabama. So it was really on the shoulders of Braden Locke, who was that backup quarterback the last 2 years. So I think if you're Luke Fickle and you're Wisconsin, you at least hope that your quarterback can be healthy this year, right? And then you can certainly find some value in that. And I think for Edwards, it's interesting because he comes from a guy in Mike Loxley who, was really known for quarterbacks at Maryland. You had Talua Tagovailoa there for, the past 3 years before Edwards was really the starter. And then Edwards kind of does not going to say that he picks up right where Tagovailoa left off, but certainly, they really like to throw the ball there. So you bring a quarterback that really wants to throw the ball into a guy with Jeff Grimes who's going to really want to run the ball. I'm not saying it's oil and water, but it's going to be interesting to see how they balance it out. I think the thing with Edwards that is underappreciated is that he also can run the ball too. He had 12 rushing touchdowns over the last 2 years. So this is a guy who, when he gets into the red zone, he can scramble and extend plays. And so there's certainly this element of Wisconsin that, you have a quarterback who's not going to be your standard pocket passer that we've seen with this complemented with the traditional run game. But I imagine this guy is going to be able to stretch the field out a little bit. And I think for him, that's going to be the important thing for Wisconsin because this is an offensive line that, is one of the best in the Big Ten. They allowed just 13 sacks last year, Brian. And I think you now have a quarterback who's experienced and it can hopefully stay healthy. I just think you need a guy who can manage games well, and then you have that complementary with the running back.
Yeah, you mentioned the injuries to the quarterback position the past couple of years. Backup for you guys this year. Danny O'Neal starter at San Diego State, so should something happen again, you do have at least experience in the backup spot as well, should that happen. Moving on to the running backs, you got Darian Dupree and Dylan Jones. What do you expect to see out of the backfield this year?
I think with Dylan Jones, he's a guy that kind of came out of nowhere this camp. He's really had a great summer for Wisconsin. I mean, you talk about having beaten out Darian Dupree as well as Cade Yakimelli, two really solid returners for Wisconsin. I mean, they're not the top dogs out of last year's running back room with Tyree Walker, but they were the 2 and 3 back for a good chunk of the season. So for Jacobs to come in there and take that spot means he's certainly have taken a leap from last year to this year. So I think for him, this is a guy who's definitely got some speed and a nice set of wheels and a guy who can certainly turn a couple loose. So I think for him, it's really about being able to be patient and being able to attack. And I'll mention Wisconsin. They're not a team that went a heavy under the eye last year, mentioning with the air raid and all of that. So I imagine for him, he's a guy that's going to be able to play outside of the tackles and be able to, again, like I said, stretch out the field for Wisconsin. And I think, you talk about this traditional Wisconsin offense, and you mentioned watching a little bit of Jeff Grimes last year as well. As much as they do run the ball with their running backs, they certainly like to maybe utilize their running backs in the passing game as well. So I'll be curious. You talk about Billy Edwards and the job, he's done at Maryland with, spreading out the field of his arm if they really use those running backs as well out in the passing game too.
And moving on to the receivers, Vinny Anthony leading wide receiver from last year returning, as well as an Ohio State transfer in Jaden Ballard. What do you expect to see from the receiving group?
I think for them, it's going to be the fluidity with the quarterback because that's not something we've seen over the last 2 years. As we talk about with Braden Locke, this receiving room has had to see different arms. That means different throwing styles and different mechanics, and never feels like they've really gelled well together. I think you're hoping, like with that transfer from Ohio State, as well as Vinny Anthony, that these guys really, over the course of summer with Edwards, are able to click well because that's important for Wisconsin. As much as we're going to talk about it, it sounds like a broken record here, going back to this traditional, we want to run the football. You also have to have solid receiver play as well. And so I think we saw that with Benny Anthony last year. I thought he really had a great season, all things considered, with the injuries to the quarterbacks. But I think for this wide receiver room this year, it provides a great opportunity. You're playing with an experienced quarterback, and it really gives you a chance to turn the ball loose. So I think for them, it's really just about gelling together in that fall camp. How much did they really click? So when, the pen hits the paper, on Thursday and then even out through the course of the season, is this group progressing or are they taking steps back? So I think for them, I expect more consistency, but also that relies on the health of the quarterback as well, because we haven't seen that for Wisconsin the last 2 years. So if your players can stay healthy, it certainly helps with that fluidity. And I think for them, that's important for this year.
Moving on to the defensive end, Mike Tressel back again as defensive coordinator. One of the things that shocked me, Trey, gave up 165 rushing yards a game. Seems very shocking for a Wisconsin defense, something I'm not very used to. Brought in a couple of transfers from UT Martin and Western Michigan. How do you think the defensive front and defense in general is going to look this year?
Again, you keep asking these hard-hitting questions, Brian. I want to say that optimistically, this is a group that's really going to come together and take that next step, but we haven't seen it for the last 2 years. This is a group where you mentioned the amount of rushing yards they give up per game. That was 17th in the Big Ten last season, trailing only Purdue for worst in the Big Ten. They also were last in the Big Ten in getting to the quarterback last year. So this is a front seven that really has their work cut out for them. They've got a lot to prove this year. And Tressel did a nice job doing out and getting some transfers in the portal, bring a couple names back. But the reality is you bring some guys back. They're a part of probably one of the worst front sevens I've had in my lifetime as a Badger fan. You talk about the defense. That is what Wisconsin has been in for the greater part of this century. And we just haven't seen it the last couple of years. So you expect speed, you expect physicality. I think a guy to keep keep an eye on that is Ben Barton. He's returning for his senior year. This is a guy who's been really solid for Wisconsin, but he needs other guys to come in around him and to play well. Daryl Peterson also as well, and Christian Allegro. Those are the guys. Those are your cornerstone players that really have to come together. Tackett Curtis as well. What is this group going to do this year? Because you certainly think that there's a lot of questions, and there's certainly a lot that's going on, going around in that locker room, right? Because this is a team that you talk about Wisconsin football. Where has the defense been? And that's something for them that they have to answer this year. So I expect them to certainly have a chip on their shoulder. The question is whether or not this group can answer the call, because we can talk about it all we want that, you're playing against Northwestern, Purdue, and whoever else is. This isn't the Big Ten West anymore. You're playing Alabama in a couple weeks. You go to Eugene, you're playing Ohio State, right? Going to the Big House this year. I mean, you could go on and on. It doesn't matter. You have to be able to play the teams that are on your schedule. And so for this group, you can't make any excuses at this point, because I think right now it's do or die for year three for Luke Fickell. And it comes at an unfortunate time, having the toughest schedule in the country. But at this point, you got to be able to take a step and move up the ladder.
Yeah, you mentioned the schedule. I don't know what you guys did to make the Big Ten upset, but that is absolutely insane. 3 college football playoff participants last year. You guys are playing in Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana. You also mentioned playing at Alabama as well. Washington, Illinois, at Minnesota last week, obviously. What do you think would constitute a successful season? Would it be making a bowl game? Is it even like a record thing? It's just like how they look. What would a successful season look like to you?
I think making a bowl game is a good start, right? Wisconsin having made a bowl appearance in 23 times since the beginning of the decade. I believe they trail Clemson, Ohio State, and Georgia, maybe. I'm missing out on maybe one other team. But, regardless of that, the consistency of Wisconsin football has been a big reason why it's been at the forefront over the course of this century. So I think you're absolutely right. I think winning enough games to qualify for becoming bowl eligible is incredibly important. But I think more than that, it's can you win rivalry games, right? Wisconsin last year, you lose to Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota. And so you talk about college sports, and it's all about winning the national championship at the end of the year, but only one team can do that. So what you do in between and outside of that is really where you can judge, how good your season was. And I go back to Michigan, right? And they beat Ohio State last year and, had about, I would say, a pretty average season for their standards, maybe even slightly below average. But you would have thought they won the national championship. Even though Ohio State won the national championship, there was still that asterisk in their season because they lost to Michigan and Michigan beat Ohio State. And so I think for Wisconsin, can you get the Axe back? Can you win the Heartland Trophy? Those are things for them that are important to the culture of what your program's all about. It's not about just beating Alabama and Oregon, right? But can you win those rivalry games? Because those are important. That matters for school pride. So overall, I think, you're qualifying for a bowl game, but I think winning those rivalry games as well is incredibly important just for the school and the direction of where you want to go. Because at the end of the day, right, those are the games that carry a lot of weight in terms of school pride. And I think for Wisconsin, that's something that with this team in and of itself, they struggle over the last couple of years with that.
It'll get started Thursday night, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Time from Camp Randall Stadium. The Badgers taking on the RedHawks to open the 2025 season. Trey, thank you so much for joining me tonight, man. Where could we find you on social media? Where could we listen to you on Thursday?
Yeah, so we'll be actually on WSUM.org. So that's just capital WSUM, then .org. So we'll have a stream set up there. You just go to our sports section and it should have live stream link available. So tune into that call. We'll be all set and ready to go for the pregame show, which I believe will be starting at 7:30. So excited to get things going. Football is officially back. It's week 1. I know we can count week 0 a little bit, but I think, once you get week 1 going, then everything's rolling fully. So excited to be back. Should be a great matchup. I mean, night games at Camp Randall doesn't get much better than that. And you welcome in a MAC opponent as well. So it's going to be a gritty football game.
Should be a good one. Excited to see you Thursday. Thanks for joining me, Trey.
Appreciate the time, Brian. Thanks.